Next, let's tackle systematic reviews and low-calorie sweeteners. This symposium started off by talking about the fact that most systematic reviews point to the fact that there appears to be a 50% partial compensation. So if I take out the sugar, put in a low-calorie sweetener, that consumer will still get about half of the calories that would have been there because there is some kind of compensation going on with what they're drinking and eating. The panelists went on to talk about the different studies within these reviews, so randomized controlled trials versus prospective cohort studies. What was interesting is the RCTs, which are considered a gold standard, would show no association really between low-calorie sweeteners and then BMI and weight gain, so kind of a lack of an effect. The prospective cohort studies, on the other hand, appear to show a positive association, which is not what you'd want to see, that you put LCS in and in fact there's some kind of weight gain or increase in BMI. The panelists went on to talk about how RCTs can have industry funding bias. Observational trials like prospective cohorts can have confounding bias, so you weren't able to control for all the different variables with physical activity or other things that may impact BMI and body weight. And then the panelists also went on, I thought it was really important and insightful that they talked about what's sort of missing here. So what about discussion of the gut microbiome? Are there enough studies that we can look at on the gut microbiome and LCS and do a systematic review? The other big piece of the puzzle that I thought was really important that was brought up is that we're lumping together all these different low-calorie sweeteners when we start doing systematic reviews, and even in some cases in different trials. So for example, if we're looking at something that suggests maybe there's an impact on the gut microbiome and the study looked at aspartame and ACE-K, we can't assume the same thing would happen for stevia and monk fruit. And yet in many cases, unfortunately, especially on a systematic review level where you're combining different data sets, the low-calorie sweeteners all get lumped together. And that's probably not the best way of going about the analysis. So the Foodscape point of view on this topic is that, number one, it's super important to understand different studies, how they were organized, how the data were analyzed. We don't all need to be statisticians, but just know that that's not a small detail when we look at systematic reviews. The second thing I thought that's worth pointing out is this was an industry-backed symposium at Nutrition 2018. It was sponsored by PepsiCo in this case, and I was just honestly thoroughly impressed that a balanced perspective was allowed to be shared, and we had different points of view, and I think that's really important for kind of getting to the bottom of where we stand on low-calorie sweeteners or really any topic. The last point I would point out is just to remember that the consumer definitely wants more natural ingredients. So I think today monk fruit and stevia tend to fall in that more relatively natural category, knowing that the word natural isn't defined, but the perception is they're more natural. But also remember that there's this idea of how sweet is sweet. And I think in many cases we have a growing consumer set that would perhaps like real sugar, but maybe a little less of it. You know, maybe we could have a little more complex flavor profiles that tap into sweetness, but have an earthiness or other flavors going on as well. That wasn't the topic of this symposium, but I think it's really behind the scenes of thinking about, you know, what is the role of low-calorie sweeteners? I'm sure we'll hear much more on this topic in the months and years to come.